Good evening, everyone. I am Prasanna, co-founder of ORDI. I welcome all of you to this 11th ORDI Care for Rare webinar series. In last 2 months, we had excellent speaker lineup speaking on various subjects and many more to come. Today we have Dr. Jayesh Sheth from Ahmedabad. I welcome Dr. Jayesh Sheth as our invited speaker for the day.
Thank you.
Dr. Jayesh Sheth is the founding chairman of RICH, that is Foundation for Research in Genetic and Endocrinology. This is also one of the first institute working in Gujarat in the field of genetics. If you ask in Gujarat and Ahmedabad anybody any question about genetics or rare diseases, they all point towards Dr. Jayesh Sheth. I think he is the second name for genetics in the state of Gujarat. Apart from his huge list of association works, some of them are: he is a member in LSD task force constituted by ICMR, and I'm happy to, both on behalf of LSDSS and ORDI, we are working with him from last almost a decade in awareness about LSDs in India. He is also Vice President of Indian Society of Human Genetics. He also has a patent in eye cell screening, to name a few. As I told you personally, I know Dr. Jayesh from last 10 years, and he is a supporter of all the patient groups. Whenever you ask for anything, he has never said no, and he is always there for us and patient group to support us. Be it clarification, we have been asking the smallest and silliest questions, and he patiently takes time to explain in a common man language to us. When it comes to patient and families, early and accurate diagnosis is one of the crucial stage in rare disease management of patient life cycle management. Earlier the diagnosis, better the opportunities and outcome for the patient and families, and also the hope. Because if you know well in advance, we can also plan better our lifestyle, day to day, care, patient care for our loved one. So today, Dr. Jayesh is going to talk about how not to miss the identification of lysosomal storage disorder, which is very, very important. As I told you, early diagnosis is key in the life cycle management. Now I request Dr. Jayesh Sheth to start the session, and I thank once again on behalf of ORDI team for taking out his valuable time to share his views on this much important session. Doctor, over to you. You can start the session now.
Thank you, Dr. Krishna. Thank you for your kind words and very kind introduction. And am I audible?
Yes, you are audible, sir.
Okay. So it's always my pleasure to be associated with any work related to rare disease. And you know that there are 7,000 rare disease, and around 70 million people are likely to be afflicted in the country. But it is as said that they are not important. Usually they are rare, so nobody cares. And that is why this group who are actively working, the LSDSS, ORDI, they all are working actively and are having associated with this group since the inception. And I know that the storage disorders, when we made the first publications in 2004 in Indian Pediatrics, what we say that the storage disorders are not uncommon. They do exist because before that we thought, oh, Tay-Sachs, Morquio, where are we going to see? Bacon, where are we going to see? They don't exist. Or perhaps we don't see them. But that was the first paper which described that storage disorders are there in the country, and that has the starting point for me to work in this area. And my today's talk is how not to miss the diagnosis of lysosomal storage disorders. Okay, and then am I move? Yes, I have to move. Yeah. So as we know that the lysosomes they are an important organelles in the body. As we say that trillions of the cells, the same way, trillions of the lysosomes are there. In each lysosome, they are located in various parts. The main function of this lysosome is to clear the cellular debris, fat, carbohydrate, proteins, nucleic acid, etc. So, and these lysosomes, they do this function with the lysosomal enzymes, which are secreted from these Golgi apparatus, and then they are transported to the cells in the cellular compartment, and then the lysosomes, they accept these enzymes, and with the help of the enzyme, they degrade the various compounds. That is how the normal function of this. And as I say, that since the lysosomes are in the many parts of the body, almost every part, so you can see that there is a normal cell. So when there is enzyme deficiency there, especially the reciprocal lysosomal enzymes, there are 70 different lysosomal disorders are there. And if the deficiency of these enzymes, they lead to the accumulation of the different substrate in the cell, and that resulting the cell gets enlarged, and then it produces all kind of phenotypes. For example, if the substrate get accumulated in the liver and spleen, preventing that the liver and spleen get enlarged. If it is bone, it leads to bone necrosis. Bone marrow, you get the bone marrow infiltration, especially for Gaucher disease. If in kidney also, it likes for Fabry disease. In the brain, the neuroregression, in heart, the cardiomyopathy. Same you can see that right from liver to bone to heart to face to skin, every part of the body, the lysosomes are there. So where are the substance? So that is why they are very heterogeneous they were overlapping phenotypes. And so clinically many times they are difficult to diagnose. And you may get a clinical clue, but to differentiate diagnosis, required to have a specific diagnosis by the enzymes and by the molecular study. So my today's talk will focus on how to precisely make the diagnosis with the minimum of the cost, and then to help the families and the patients and to the doctor itself. You can see that there are different phases of the children with the different disorders. So you can see that they right from the hepatomegaly to the post-facial feature, the skeletal anomalies to the spasticity, and so that depends on which enzyme is deficient. The result is way substance get accumulated. So if the substance maybe accumulate in the brain, leads to neuroregression. In the eye, it leads to cerebral visual loss, like Batten disease, or maybe hearing loss in many of the MPS disorders. And most common is the Gaucher disease, where the accumulation of this glucocerebrosidase is in the liver and spleen, the huge spleen. So in short, you can say that when there are different when to suspect a child. If we can say pinpoint the point, the first we start with the post-facial features, dysmorphism with regression of learned skill, then it should come to mind. It seems to be the mucopolysaccharide disorders. It could be eye cell disease. It could be a GM1 gangliosidosis. It could be a Niemann-Pick disease. If there is a gross splenomegaly, hepatomegaly, most commonly associated with the Gaucher, Niemann-Pick, and Waldman disease. If the child presents with a skeletal dysplasia with a disostosis multiplex, it mostly is seen in the children with Morquio MPS 4A, MPS 4B, and Matthews Lemming. If there is a progressive neuroregression, spasticity, and visual loss, is a Krabbe disease, metachromatic leukodystrophy, the neuronal steroid lipofuscinosis type 1, neuronal steroid lipofuscinosis type 2. If the child presents to you with epilepsy and hyperactivities and the neuroregression, it mostly seen with the children with the Tay-Sachs, and if it is the organomegaly, is seen with the center disease. If the only leukodystrophies are mostly suspect child with MLD or Krabbe disease. Same way for cerebral and cerebellar atrophy and progressive visual loss, most commonly seen in the child with the Batten disease, while the presence of Terry spot is seen in the many of the storage disorders like Niemann-Pick, Gaucher, Tay-Sachs, Sialic acid storage disorders, while child with ataxia and visual loss is seen in the children with NCL or Batten disease. Again, if you see in the mother, the recurrent non-immune hydrops is mostly associated with the that's seen in the pregnancies, mostly is associated with the Niemann-Pick C, Gaucher, Sly, Haller, Sialic acid storage disorders. You see the child in the fetus in neonatal period, neonatal ascites, and hepatomegaly, seen with the Niemann-Pick C, and pulmonary effusion with hepatosplenomegaly, mostly we see in the child with the Niemann-Pick C2. If you see if the children or adults with angiokeratosis, acroparesthesia, or stroke in young, most commonly struck in mind that it's likely to be a Fabry disease. And if you see the child with cardiomyopathy or cardiopathy, it seems to the Pompe disease. So this is how the different the clinical phenotypes seems to be associated with stomach disorder. Now, how to differentiate them? So based on this, तो कहना नानू करेगा ये तो बिल्कुल नहीं करना. So there we have devised the three screening strategy because like we see the child with the hepatomegaly, splenomegaly, irrespective of whatever it is, we do plasma chitotriosidase. If child with the hepatomegaly, maybe splenomegaly and the post-facial features, we suspect with the mucolipidosis and we do the ISO screening. If you suspect again the child with the post-facial features and neurodegeneration and the skeletal abnormality, skeletal involvement, then we do the urinary gag investigations by quantitative and qualitative, and we'll go one by one how to do that. So this slide depicts that. See, first, as I said earlier, that when you see the child with the hepatosplenomegaly with a very huge massive spleen, and mostly in India, we see the child with a huge spleen around in 2 months, 3 months, or 4 months time. That thing comes to my mind that it's likely to be a Gaucher or Niemann-Pick, and especially how to differentiate in a Gaucher disease. The level of plasma chitotriosidase is almost 1,000 times elevated. So we see in the child with the when you find the class in the especially in Gaucher disease, the chitotriosidase is almost 100 to 1,000-fold elevated, and you are sure that child is likely to have a Gaucher disease. If the is almost again chitotriosidase will also get elevated in Niemann-Pick disease. So it's not as like as magnitude as the Gaucher disease is Niemann-Pick. So if your chitotriosidase is very high, grossly elevated, 100-fold to 1,000-fold, you are sure the child either has a Gaucher or Niemann-Pick disease, and then based on that, you can do the enzyme studies. So one question is there that not all, even 85 to 90% cases, you are going to get the chitotriosidase elevated, but in 5 to 10% cases, chito may be normal or may be undetectable. So in those cases, you have to again depend on the enzyme study. The other storage disorders like Krabbe, GM1, you do find these the chito elevated, but they are not with magnitude as you see in the Gaucher and the Niemann-Pick. So we use this the first tier screening test in the lab. We have been very successful so far in our 5,000 data so far. Second one is a urinary gag. It's very powerful test. For only thing one has to be very careful. Not only quantitative, you do find the gag false positive elevation in some of the diseases which I will show you. But what is important is urinary quantitative test by 1D or 2D electrophoresis. You can see in the slide that you find that when you do the electrophoresis, the gag gets excreted in the three different patterns: is the chondroitin sulfate, dalmatan sulfate, and the heparin sulfate. You see this, as you see in the slides, you find at the axis of the dalmatan sulfate, you find in three kinds: MPS1, MPS2, MPS6, and MPS7. If you find the presence of only the excess of heparin sulfate, you find only in cases with Sanfilippo. Excess heparin sulfate you do not find in any other cases. If you find the chondroitin sulfate, the metal sulfate, and again the heparin sulfate, this is a very typical with the Sanfilippo. Again, this slide doesn't show the presence of the keratin sulfate, which I will show you that. The keratin sulfate you see only in cases with mercury. Similar way, so many of the times there is a very clinical phenotype overlapping with the mucolipidosis and MPS, mucopolysaccharide. So what we have patented, developed this test, and is 100% sensitive and specific. You take the plasma and with the substrate addition.
Have some lab-based experience, but you gradually build it up. I mean, when I was absolutely no exposure to lab activities. Try to focus on what you want to learn, make your concepts clear, and as you progress, try to get more opportunities to lab.
Hello.
And the next question that we have is, Is there any advantage of antibody treatment from over the use
Not
of
able to,
vaccine?
Dr. Kumar, I am not able to listen properly.
Different kind of approach. So vaccine is something that will give you long-term memory. So vaccine, once you have the vaccine, effective vaccine
Huh?
for life, at least in theory. Antibody
Hello?
treatment is
Dr. Kumar? I think there is a lot of
from
disturbance coming in here.
antibody. It will neutralize the receptors on the virus.
Can I continue now? It's not audible now. Hello? Huh?
Sir, it is audible. You can continue now.
Okay, now we can
I
go.
muted the attendee.
Pardon?
I have muted the person, sir, who was unmuted.
Okay, fine. Okay, fine. So what we find that when we find this I cell positive with dark brown color, that says that the axis of the sulfate is there, and the axis sulfate we find in the mucolipidosis. So this is 100% sensitive and specific. Cytotoxicity is around 85 to 90%, and usually GAG is almost about 95 to 98% specific and sensitive. Only thing you have to be very careful to do this GAG investigation, and have to need experience for that. So based on that, now I'll go one by one with one, like if you see the child with dysmorphism and developmental delay, what you do, you can look at the child with 10-month-old child referred to us with glaucoma. There were some core facial features were there, or no other signs were there. You can look at the child, and then at 3 years of age, when this child came for follow-up, you can see these dysmorphic features with a hairy face and the kyphoscoliosis. Child also had a mild hepatomegaly, protruding tongue, glaucoma was persistent. What we did in initial stage, when we did the urinary GAG study, as I said also, you find the very excess of the dimethyl sulfate, and based on that, and then mild CS and mild HS, this is a very peculiar picture you see in MPS 1 and MPS 2 and MPS 7, MPS 6 and MPS 7. But in Mantioxlime, you don't find heparin sulfate. You find only on CS and DS. And based on that, we did the enzyme studies, and enzyme study, we found that alpha adenylate was low. So that confirmed this child has got MPS 1. So this just minimize your efforts and very simplified investigations. So instead of doing this, because nowadays I think it is a practice, otherwise we don't just go for exams. But there are such, I will show you some of the slides where your simple investigations can solve the problem and can help the families and the doctors itself. Here again a child, the 9-month-old child, you can see this child has a kyphoscoliosis, soft stature, short arm and thighs, saddle-shaped nose. Not, I don't know whether it's visible there. It's a short palm and normal lower and upper limb movement, and Mongolian spots where the child has got. Look at this, and the X-ray was suggested that the dorsal lumbar function, the picking of the vertebra was there, and the dysplastic acetabula. So urinary EPP, we did the GAG study. We found the excess of the dimethyl sulfate and mild of the heparin sulfate. We did this alpha adenylate, which was undetectable. So again, this confirmed that this child has got the MPS 1, and that we lead to the diagnosis. Same child, we do find sometimes with this same child at 3 years of age, more severe and progressive symptoms as compared to the early age presentation. Addition of the corneal clouding, which you don't find in MPS 2. So it is one of the clinical clues, the corneal clouding you don't find in MPS 2, which you find in MPS 1 also. Here again, but this is very interesting case. Look at the pedigree of this family. The both brother and sister, they have a post facial features, neuroregression, skeletal abnormalities is there, and the consanguinity of the is there. And both one sister, the sister has died, brother had similar symptoms, and one younger brother is normal. So obviously, the doctor would suspect they may have the karyotype studies. Or so what we did that in this case, the MRI brain has shown that J-shaped shallow sella and the prominent clivus, as we can see in the slides. And then the BERA, the child has a profound hearing loss was there, BERA was done, but this child was referred around 12 to 10 to 12, 13 years of age, so much advanced age. And the abdominal sonographies, the hepatosplenomegaly, there was no cardiomegaly in echo study. So obviously, karyotype is the first needed investigations to find out whether there is any chromosomal anomaly there. The karyotype study was normal. And the sister also had the similar features, died. What doctor we did investigations, the doctor had ordered for the array CGH. This case was referred to us from Chennai, and we didn't have any access to the more details. So we did the array study, and we found that there was a deletion in 10q and duplication in 20q in the child. But as one has to remember that when you find in array CGH deletion duplications, you always need to confirm the pathogenicity, confirm that in the parents. When we did the parental study, we found the father also has got a normal father has got 10q deletion, mother has got 10q deletion and 22q duplication. So that means whatever the deletion duplication we identified, that is not that doesn't give any the diagnostic for the child. So what it is? So again, this was the SNP array. When you do the array, SNP array is more important. Why SNP array is? Because based on this, we look at the criteria again, and we look at the data, and we found there was a long stretch of homozygosity that involved the NAGLU gene and the GUSB gene. So that gives some clue that possibly we are dealing with child having a mucopolysaccharide disorders. We asked for the urine sample, and if you look at the urine sample, there was a the CS and excess of the HS. You do not find in any condition excess of the heparin sulfate except Sanfilippo. So we suspected Sanfilippo, and then we did the enzyme study. We found that the child has got a deficient activity of beta the glucose aminidase in the plasma. So that confirmed the child has got a Sanfilippo B. By the mother, they were in the carrier range, but no doubt the carrier study you cannot identify based on the enzyme study. And the normal brother had a normal activity of the enzymes. So the message is that use the proper investigation. If you have a proper clue and please the proper investigation, perhaps we have saved the family, because this case almost took 6 months time to get the diagnosis. We are doing one by one. Similar here again, okay, this child is born to the very prominent doctors in Gujarat, and he had earlier 2 abortion. There was no consanguinity. The child during the pregnancy also the IUGR birth weight and he premature birth 1.8 kg. Look at the child with the post-facial features and very hurt cry. Skeletal abnormality was there. It was very even after birth, the parent noted the ears, a very noisy breathing and Mongolian spot on the back. And otherwise, he was normal. They say intellectually, the child was normal. And then they came to us. The MRI was done. The gibbous deformity was seen in the child in the dorsal and the lumbar luxation and the L1 and L2 position. So that just gives a clue that there's something wrong with this mucopolysaccharide disease. But it may be the MPS or maybe the mucolipidosis. X-ray also has the narrowing of the second metacarpus and the triangular shape of skull. So these are all the supporting investigations and maybe the healthy doctors. When we did that, we did the urinary gag study. The Ajude spot was very mild positive. Gag was borderline range is 15.2. So that gave the wrong perception that perhaps we are dealing in a child having the mucopolysaccharide disorders. But when we did the enzyme study, leukocyte, the beta-gal was 6.2, is 35% of the mean. The beta-galactosidase was 127, the 50% mean. So both the enzymes were low, but they were not sufficient to fill the diagnosis. So that means there is something else is there. So what we did is, we did the as the eye cell screening. We found that the eye cell was positive. And based on that, we did the plasma enzyme. And you know that the plasma enzymes, because they are not transported, the enzymes getting synthesized, but they are not getting transported because of deficiency in the mannose phosphoreceptor and the gene. And so they are leaking in the extracellular matrix in urine and plasma. So plasma levels are more than 100-fold elevation. The beta glucuronidase was 120,000. amylase, total aryl sulfatase. So both are highly, this all enzymes are grossly elevated. So this confirms the diagnosis of the mucolipidosis. But the message again, you do find usually get false elevated also. You do find the urinary spot positive. But when, and again, we did the EPP study also in this child. The case also was, there was some extra migration of the electrophoresis in the keratin sulfate region. So these all were the, I think they were not false positive because, there were multiple enzyme deficiencies there. So perhaps that may be one of the reasons why in the mucolipidosis you get the false positive get elevation. And final diagnosis is then the mucolipidosis type 2 and 3. And recently we published the large series of the patients with the mucolipidosis with Dr. Asim Dalal, and they published in the Journal of Human Genetics. And this all 22 cases. There are total cases of 67. And among them, almost 22 to 25 are contributed from our center. And all were those who are screened positive by mucolipidosis, they were again positive, they have a confirmed positivity of the mucolipidosis type 2 and type 3. Here again the case, okay? Well, the adjuvant, as I said, the material was mild positive, GAG quantitative was borderline high, and in this case again, with multiple enzymes were elevated, so that gives a clue. And we did see again confirmation by molecular study, and we find this homozygous mutation in the GMP TAB gene at the codon C1144 that makes a change from tryptophan to proline at in a protein position 382. So that again confirms the diagnosis, the enzymatic screening, enzymatical and molecular level. And this, I think, we published in the Indian in Indian Pediatrics way back in 2012, and we recently got the confirmed the Indian patent for the same. Many times you see the child, you can see the extensive Mongolian spots, mild dysmorphic features child had, the physical and cognitive regression at 11 months the parent noticed. Here the decaying of vertebra was there, and suppose we go to the MPS disorders. We did the MPS screen again. You can see that this MPS screen, the HCA was positive, GAG was borderline raised, very mild elevated, and this EPP was normal. They cannot give us, and it doesn't give any clue because there was no excess of the CS or HS. So again, they say the child doesn't have the MPS definitely. So then we look for the enzymes, and what we found that the ICER was negative. We looked at enzyme beta-galactosidase because we always, in such cases, beta-galactosidase first as a reference enzyme, and beta-gal was low. That gives the confirmatory diagnosis of GM1 gangliosidosis. And this is so in two types, in mucolipidosis and GM1 gangliosidosis. You do find a false positive GAG, false elevated borderline GAG. Again, careful EPP, electrophoresis pattern, and the enzyme study will help with diagnosis. Second now group is the children with skeletal dysplasia and dysostosis multiplex. You can see this child with multiple deformities in the bones that involve the chest, back, both the knees. And here again, the 3-year-old male child, you can see the X-rays of the inferior, the picking of the lower thoracic vertebra, and bullet-shaped metacarpals of the child had, and elevated GAG was there. Child also had a risk because he referred as the age of 3 years. Most of the morpheo patients, we usually get referred by around 3 years to 5, that is the mean age of 3 to 5 years. Restricted movement of the shoulders, elbow, wrist, and knees, delayed walking, no mental, usually morpheo, they don't have a mental retardation. The mild post, they don't have even post-facial features or mild post-facial features. You don't find them corneal clouding, but this child also had a mild corneal clouding, kyphos deformity of the spine, incomplete supination of the hands. So that's, and we did the studies. What we found that urinary GAG, you look at this keratin sulfate. This keratin sulfate you usually find only in cases with the morpheo A or B. So based on that, you do find false elevated, but one has to be, I think, clinical differentiation has to be done in those cases. When we did this enzyme study, beta-galax sulfatase, which was low, and that gives us the confirmatory diagnosis of morpheo A. Morquio B usually we don't find because these children they don't survive now. And we also did the last study that recently I think we have just signed for the publication. We shortly this paper will come out with the founder mutations because the Bichele and his group has published from Manipal, the large group of the children with Morquio mutation, Morquio A mutation. But they are mainly comprising from the southern and northern region. None of the children were from the Gujarat. And what we found in Gujarat that the P7 now in exon 2, you can see that 55% of the children with skeletal dysplasia and Morquio, they have this mutation. And not only that, we identified this is the founder mutations. In specific community, in Patel community in Gujarat, the child with a skeletal dysplasia or the isostasy multiplex, if you find the Morquio, this is the most common mutation what we have identified as a founder, and it's a founder mutation. This was first reported by Tomatsu in Japan. I think some Indian family living there, and he reported this is an Indian family. This was the only mutation reported so far. And then we identified that yes, in the Bichele series from Nanipal, they have not identified this mutation. But in our series again, the 25 children, we identified this is the most common mutation seen in around 60% of the children with P7-7R. Now, third group is the children with hepatosplenomegaly. This is the most common. As I said, that the chitotriosidase is one of the first line of the marker we use, and it's very helpful. See, I think in India, when we see that they have the phenotype is more severe type. This is a 3-year-old child with coarse facial features, with skin positive, huge spleen, scaly. This child also had a scaly skin and non-neuronopathic because there was no CNS involvement, there was no gaze palsy, no any saccadic eye movement there, and bone marrow was done that has shown the severe erythroid hyperplasia, large cells with pupillary cytoplasm, and child also there is thrombocytopenia. So these are all the secondary investigations they were giving the clue. And then we did the investigation. The chitotriosidase was 38,000, normal range from 62, and beta glucosidase was 4.3, which is nearly 10% of the activity. So that confirmed the diagnosis of the Gaucher type 1. We did the molecular study of this case, and that also almost large series we published. I'll show you in the next slides. The child has got a mutation in 359Q, homozygous mutations, and this child is on the ERT. You can see the screen is 33 centimeters before ERT, and after 1 year of ERT, screen is 12 centimeters. This child is from Jamnagar and regularly followed up by, I think, Dr. Mamtai looking up at this child. But this shows that this is the one disease historic disorder where really almost 95%, 98%, I think the child get benefited, the person get benefited. So that is why the replacement therapy is really helpful in the early diagnosis. And if we are able to give the therapy, they are really benefited. Here again, a child with 11-year-old female child is from Rajasthan. Is born to a second degree of the consanguineous pair, presented with the convulsion and myotonus and the mnemonic consolidation, the hypotonia, and the breast DTR, increased tone, and then the child also was not able to head holding severe cough fever. You can see this liver and spleen, and USG study has shown hepatosplenomegaly, spleen is marked elevated, and CBC, usually children with Gaucher disease or Niemann-Pick, they have the anemia also, and the platelet count was near normal. There was no thrombocytopenia in this child. And then we did the investigations. The chitotriosidase was elevated, but not as grossly as 7,000. The glucosidase was very low, and that confirmed the diagnosis of the Gaucher disease. And it's a type 2 disease. The child has died, I think, at 2 years of age, in Rajasthan. And molecular study is a homozygous mutation was identified at position of protein position at 241 from glycine to arginine, and that again confirmed the diagnosis type 2. Though in the series of over 100 children with Gaucher disease, most of the children in India, I think everywhere world over, the type 1, there are 5% children who do find the type 2 and 5% maybe type 3, but you don't find the type 2 and type 3 that common. Here again, a child with a 4-year-old female child with anemia, thrombocytopenia, mild hypotonia. He also had a severe osteoporosis with cortical irregularity and the fracture seen along the midsection of the humerus. And this fused spleen is very visible, and post-facial can also have post-facial features. Bone marrow has shown that the Gaucher cells were there. Now I think bone marrow is not done because of the availability of the enzymes. There is no need to do the enzyme test. And in this case, the glucose was normal and glucosidase was low. And this child is clinically confirmed as a type 3 Gaucher disease. And even I think there's a long debate with the LT-protein mutation, because both the parents we identified LT-protein heterozygous. The child was a homozygous mutation who died at the 4.5 years, and then the parents came for the prenatal diagnosis, and we did the enzyme studies, which was the normal range or in the overlapping range, and the mutation also was shown that only one allele was there, LT-P, and one was normal, so that confirmed the diagnosis of this carrier fetus. So what is important in the prenatal diagnosis? We have to have a confirm in that case, and if possible, you do the molecular study. But if you don't have a molecular study, you can rely on the enzyme study as well with 99% accuracy. Few cases we have to be careful, so where you need a proper, I think, investigations, or we have to look at investigations. So maybe in 1%, less than 1% cases. Here again, a 20 years male is a normal up to 15 years. After that, suddenly difficulty in walking. He is referred to us from Saurashtra region. He had a persistent anemia. His platelet count was slightly low. It's not that marked thrombocytopenia, but thrombocytopenia was there. But what he had a difficulty around, he noticed that the parents by 15 years of age, they started having a difficulty. And when the X-ray was done, there was suggestion of the avascular necrosis of the left head of the femur. You can see that. And that gave the clue that possibly, when the sonography was done, there was a moderate hepatomegaly with marked splenomegaly. But this is a 20-year-old child, old male child. Bone marrow has shown that the histiocytes were seen, and the cytoplasmal cells was the intense fast staining. There were no foamy cells when there was any significant cells. The Gaucher cells were there. And then we did the enzyme study, the chitotriocyte screening test, 54,000, and glucosidase was low. The first adult onset case of Gaucher disease in our series we identified. And when we did the mutation again, child had a LT4P mutation, the compound heterozygous mutation, LT4P, this patient, and he has other mutation is the 329C in the position in GBA gene, and that confirmed the diagnosis. And recently also we published, last year we published around 8 cases of the adult Gaucher again, and we found that they are not only thing the mild to moderate anosmia. Whenever we see the adult with unexplained thrombocytopenia, bone pain, difficulty in walking, and unexplained avascular necrosis, we may think that the patient may have the underlying cause of Gaucher disease and screen them. Again, the most common mutations, the LT4 being adult, we found three mutations, the common one, the disease causing. This is the last series of the Gaucher disease we published in the BMC Medical Genetics in 2019. And see that the hotspot, the LT4P, seems to be the most common mutations in India, irrespective of throughout the country. LT4P is a common mutation around 60% of the patients, children with the Gaucher disease. This is the most common mutation. Only thing is, there is still a debate now whether these children, because the type, those who are, if you look at the world over data, the LT4P is most commonly seen with the type 3, not type 1, but in India it is type 1. Yes, some of the children, there is an argument, yes, some of the children may progress to type 3 the later stage. But when we diagnose at the 2 years or 3 years of age with the Gaucher disease and with LT4P, it is very unlikely to develop to type 3 and is type 2, type 1. So again, I can say that the LT4P is the most common mutation, and you cannot differentiate the type, the phenotype, the type 1, type 2, or type 3 based on at least the genotype in India, except few patients. The second category in hepatosplenomegaly is in the child with the Niemann-Pick. With the Niemann-Pick also you find the elevated spleen and liver, and we do find elevated of the chitotriocytes. The most specific enzyme is the acid sphingomyelin. acid-sphingomyelin is very low. If you find a very low level of the sphingomyelin, it comes from the child has got the Niemann-Pick A disease, the CNS involvement. If there is no CNS involvement, the Niemann-Pick type B. Here again, sometime we look at the child. This child came to us from Afghanistan. He, 4-year-old child. The family had one child who died with a similar symptom. Child had a mild hepatosplenomegaly. He had a difficulty. He had a Gaze palsy also. Child had, and he was difficulty in walking. We did this all, and then study we did. We could not find anything. We did the Wallman, we did the glucose readers, we did the Spingo, everything was normal. Then we did the Philippe stain, and we can see the Philippe stain. Because what happened in this children, the cholesterol accumulated in the intracellular. You can see these small pigmented bodies. These are all the cholesterol accumulation. These are the normal cells. So this is the first case, the Niemann-Pick C reported from India and published in Indian Pediatrics. I think this is again way back in 2008 or 2009. Again, but Niemann-Pick C, these are the two cases I think we got from Mumbai. We found the child who had the child born to a consanguineous parents with a chronic grade 2 and 3 dyspnea, hepatomegaly, bronchoalveolar lavage, showing the moderate amount of foamy macrophages were there, and then they could not identify what it is. And did the study possibly we suspect that Niemann-Pick disease is there. CT scan has shown that consolidation with mediastinal lymphadenopathy was there in this trial. X-ray was the hyperinflation initially, followed by later alveolar infiltration was there. And the enzyme study was Niemann-Pick was not that classical low in 1.1. So it could be Niemann-Pick. We cannot get a clue whether Niemann-Pick is there or not confirmed. So then we did the molecular study and we found that the child has got a homozygous mutation in NPC2 gene, and there is a truncated mutations in exon 2 and in intron 2. And similar case again, we found, this gives a confirmed diagnosis. So when you see the child with hepatomegaly, hepatosplenomegaly, and bronchoalveolar lavage with macrophage, foamy macrophage, with pulmonary, the child with hepatosplenomegaly, with pulmonary involvement, you suspect the child may have a Niemann-Pick C. Because in Niemann-Pick A and B, they do not have a pulmonary involvement, unlikely to have a pulmonary involvement. This again, sorry. So this case again, we published also in the two cases published in the BMC Pediatrics in Niemann-Pick C from India. And there are several co-authors. And this was again a recent studies we completed with the help of DBT, and we found that the child with hepatosplenomegaly and what is the underlying cause of the storage disorders, we find that again the Gaucher disease, Niemann-Pick, and others as LSD. So you can look at this slide. There was nearly around 80 children were normal, 78 were had a out of 250 children. Nearly around 60% of the children, they have underlying cause of storage disorders. So the message is, you see the child with hepatosplenomegaly, with and if we have thrombocytopenia, or absence or presence of thrombocytopenia, there is 60% chance the child may have a storage disorders. It may not be Gaucher disease, it may not be Niemann-Pick, it could be GM1, it could be mucolipidosis, it could be MPS1, it could be the tyrosinemia, MPS 6, Pompe, Wallman. So these are the even Sanfilippo also. Multiple sulfated deficiency, we also identified one case. Sialic acid, you find that. So there are several storage disorders that are associated with these conditions. I have seen this in slide. 69% children with hepatosplenomegaly, with anemia have underlying cause of LSD. With GD the most Gaucher disease is the most common one. And there's two patients, the one that we have two children who are two patients receiving the replacement therapy. One is the adult child, is iron, and one is the adult female. She, the 26-year-old female receiving the ERT, and they are doing extremely well, receiving therapy since last 2.5 years. So again, the storage disorders with neurodegradation. When you see the child with neurodegradation attending the genetic center, and we publish in Indian Pediatrics, what we identify investigated around 309 children. Out of them, the 71% they were diagnosed with different storage disorders. Among them, the most common were the glycolipid storage disorders, followed by the MPS, followed by sulfatide degradation with neuronal steroid lipofuscinosis, mucolipidosis, sialic acid storage disorder, Niemann-Pick and picosidosis. So these are the most common. When you see the child with the progressive neuroregression, or there is a attenuation, or there is a learn skill is regression of the learn skill, possibly which are underlying cause of storage disorders, is more likely. And this again we published. I think this is the only report available from India showing the children with the most common storage disorders in with neuroregression. Well, most commonly, see the child with neuroregression with cherry red spot. When you see the child with cherry red spot and neuroregression, mostly in the Tay-Sachs, most commonly with the Tay-Sachs, you may find with the sialic acid, because sialic acid has a very gross dystrophic features. And here, the cherry red spot is the accumulation of the glycosphingolipids in the plasma membrane, the neurons, and the glia. Those are nervous systems, and they are widespread neuronal distension in the CNS. That is why these children have a spasticity and neuroregression. And in the HEXA, the most common enzyme, we find low level of HEXA activity that confirm the diagnosis of the Tay-Sachs disease. And here again, a 2-year-old male child with regress of the milestone age of 4 months, history of repeated convulsion, hypotonia, normal hearing, vision, no organomegaly. MRI was suggestive of dysmyelination with periventricular and subcortical white matter. Such a suspected case of neurodegenerative disease. What to look for? We did the enzyme study in leukocyte. We look for the PPT and TPP specific for the pattern disease. We also look for the GM1 normal. HEXA was not low, so that again confirmed the diagnosis of the Tay-Sachs disease in this case. And the child has got a homozygous mutation in one insertion in TATC. This is a reported mutation worldwide. In India also, this is one of the 10% children, they do have this TATC insertion mutation. Many of the child, what we also diagnose that the doctors ask for the Tay-Sachs. We do the exit studies. If the child has got a organomegaly or hepatomegaly, the child may have underlying cause of Sandhoff disease. Many cases I can say that we are diagnosed, they refer to us for Tay-Sachs and we diagnose that as a Sandhoff disease. So when you see the child with the neuroregression and with the hepatomegaly, perhaps, and you may looking for, you do not restrict yourself only to the HEXA study. You do HEXA and hexaminidase P also, or P. They both are low, that is we do find in this kind of disease. And interestingly, the Gujarat, again, once again, there are 2 founder mutations we identified in Parmar community in Saurashtra region. Around 40% of the children with Tay-Sachs, they have the E462V and D322Y mutations in HEXA gene, and that is only specific to Gujarat. This is published in PLOS in 2000, I think 2014, and now it is well accepted also. And I think nowhere else you find these mutations. But what is important is when you see the child with hyperacusis, neuroregression and epilepsy, this again case was referred to us from southern region. The board won to a 3rd degree consanguinity with the parents. Eldership died at 1.5 years and cause was not known. No prenatal risk factors, presented at 1 year, the gross developmental delay, poor social response, no seizure. You can look at that, the child looked normal. HEXA was normal. Only the child had a hyperacusis and neuroregression with epilepsy. What do you suspect? What was the cause? We did the HEXA study, there is no Tay-Sachs. But look the MRI study also, there was a dysmyelination was seen. We did the GM2 activator protein. This is the first case I think reported from India. We published again with this was the case referred to us from Dr. Datar and Dr. Sheila. Both has referred this case. And we did the GM2 activator gene study. We found these mutations in exon 3 and the intron 3. And this, so what the message is, when you see the child with neuroregression, with hyperacusis, with epilepsy, please, and if you find the enzyme study normal, think for the GM2 activator protein deficiency, because you do find activator protein deficiency as a cause. So we have found so far only 2 cases with GM2 activator protein deficiency. Many may be missed also. So children with phenotypic presentation of GM2 gangliosidosis and normal enzyme activity in leukocyte need to be investigated for activated protein deficiency, and there is no enzyme CO2 straight away. But this gene is very small, so it doesn't cross much. Only 3 exons are there. Again, with the child with leukodystrophies, look at the neurodegradation with leukodystrophy. See the child with the claw hands, hammer toe, and progressive neurodegradation with very muscular rigidity. He could not stand with support and ascending posterior paralysis, convulsion. MRI was suggested to the leukodystrophy. It's obvious when you see the leukodystrophy, either you there is a sulfatide accumulation, you suspect in metachromatic leukodystrophy or the Krabbe disease. We did the enzyme study sulfatase A, which was 37.1, reversible normal till 1.5 years and followed by neurodegradation and died at 4 years of age. It was very crucial for this case diagnosed, and it turned out to be the metachromatic leukodystrophy. Again, in our case with the leukodystrophy, what we find the most common with the metachromatic leukodystrophy, followed by the Krabbe as the most common identification of the student disorders. Here again, the child with the dysmyelination, I think MRI can give us a clue that if there's a clinician, if you do the MRI and the clinical examination, that give us a clue that the child has got a dysmyelination or the leukodystrophy, and do this enzyme study that gives you the confirmatory diagnosis of MLD or the Krabbe disease. This is the case again, a Krabbe disease with the globoid cell leukodystrophy, the 5-month-old child. The mother sitting with the child with 5 months of age. He had a myoclonic jerk at 3 months of age with delayed milestone. There is an accumulation of the cytosine as a lipid highly toxic to the oligodendrocytes and squamous cells. That is why these children are usually very spastic, and they become by 2 months of age, they just no movement. They have a partial motor seizures. Muscular twitching is often seen in these children. Licking and chewing movements are seen. And neuropathy, there was abnormal BERA and mental retardation. You cannot say, but there was a supplemental growth. Plasma chitosis, you do find in Krabbe disease, you do find the moderate elevation of plasma chitosis, and galactocerebrosidase were undetectable. So that comes from the diagnosis of the Krabbe disease. Again, the children, which I think this is only a few slides now, with neurodegradation, seizures. And if you look at the visual loss, which you don't find in other study disorders, visual loss and ataxia, this is a very classical case. He is an old farmer who is from village and he's walking with the child. He said, sir, ये बच्चा तो बहुत चलता था मेरा, 6 साल तक तो बिल्कुल ठीक था, अभी बिल्कुल चल नहीं सकता, ये ataxia उनके दे. He has a difficulty in vision also. There is a progressive visual loss. He walk in the clinic. I don't know whether I'll be able to play this slide, so anyway, I'll just close this. He age of onset at 3.5 years, they notice that he has difficulty in walking and some difficulty in the vision also. MRI, usually in these cases, we do find the MRI with the cerebral and cerebral atrophy, and the enzyme study, the tripeptidase TPP study is low, 9.7 nanomole. That confirms the diagnosis of the patent NCL2, type 2. So this again a second case with a 5-year-old child with seizures, with a clumsiness in hand, frequent fall, diffuse cerebral and cerebral. So we saw that cerebral and cerebral atrophy is commonly seen in these children with progressive visual loss. You suspect the child may underlying cause of patent disease. You may not find NCL1, NCL2. The third one is the NCL6 also be identified. So you can look for the NCL1, NCL2, or NCL6, but there are no enzyme study for NCL6. So you have to look for the gene study. And nowadays with the NGS, you can look for this gene panel study. So just first rule out with NCL1 and NCL2. If they are negative, you think that the child may have some NCL, other form of NCL there. And this child again, the TPP study was low. So that again a confirmatory diagnosis of the NCL2. And we identified the mutations. This also published a part of the ICMR task force, lysosomal storage disorders. The task force, we published this paper, the first, I think, publications, the mutation spectrum of the Batten disease in India. And there were no specific common, except the 2 common mutations are seen in exome 7. So we can see these are the hotspot, but the only, I think we have 16 patients are together. So we cannot say there is no enough power to say this is a common mutation, but we can say that the exon 7 is the hotspot area, and you can look for the mutations and then look for the other mutations in other genes if you want to do the molecular studies. Similar way, For the NCL2 also, TPP1 also, we identify there is exon 5, exon 11. These are the hotspot area in the gene with the most of the mutation harboring in this region. And most common with NCL, NCL2 is the most common in the Batten disease. And so whenever you see the child, NCL2 is more commonly seen as compared to NCL1. So children with cardiomyopathy and muscle myopathy, I think the echocardiography, as you all know, that is one of the clues that provides the clue for the Fabry and the Pompe disease. And you see, look at the child, this child with 5.5 years with irritability and respiratory distress and cardiomyopathy and muscle myopathy. And then with the enzymes, there is the most common muscular myopathy and the cardiomyopathy in the child. We suspect the child with the Pompe disease. This was the first case I think we diagnosed with the Pompe in our center. And we all know that they have the feeding difficulties, heart complications, breathing difficulties, muscle weakness are most common signs of the Pompe disease in the child. Adult onset Pompe so far I have not identified. The key organ involvement is that the glycogen storage primarily affect the muscles, and the major muscle groups are the cardiac muscles, and the proximal muscle also are involved, and respiratory muscles also that are involved. So these are the three main components that key organs involvement with the glycogen storage. In the diagnosis, ECG is the first clue that the left ventricular hypertrophy, you get the short PR also, and left ventricular outflow tract obstruction. They are one of the clues. The CPK also mild elevated. You do find urinary oligosaccharide positive, but obviously the final diagnosis is the leukocyte study, the alpha-1 glucosidase in the blood, and you can also do in the NBS, and you can do fibroblast also. Fabry disease similarly with often life-threatening, I think they are underdiagnosed caused due to deficiency of alpha-gal, progressive accumulation of the globotriacyl ceramide GL3, the vasculature or tissue resulting in major system damage, mainly the renal involvement, cardiac, and the premature stroke. The prevalence is 1 in 5 to 10,000 X-linked, and the female can have a varying degree of disease manifestations in this. When to suspect the burning pain in hands and feet, angiokeratoma, renal disease, inability to perspire, characteristic word on the cornea of the eye. If you go to the ophthalmologist, the mitral valve prolapse typically begins during childhood with episode of pain and discomfort in hands and kidney dysfunction. First sign of the disease is kidney dysfunction. You see, this is a child. Here, the adult Fabry, he was moving around, I think, in Gujarat and could not diagnose. And finally, I think he went to Kerala, he's from Kerala, and you can see the angiokeratoma and the increased burning in the sensation in the fingers. And Dr. Sheila, he diagnosed this case as a Fabry disease. Did the enzyme study and was done by us. This is recently diagnosed this case of Fabry by Dr. Krati from Baroda. He diagnosed as a 14-year-old child. You can see the angiokeratoma. So, and this patient is receiving the therapy. For this case, I think we have no follow-up. For skin manifestations, the decreased perspiration, increased burning sensation, young stroke. This patient also had a stroke. Recently, I think he also had a stroke and he has gone back to Kerala with Dr. Sheila. Otherwise, he is receiving the therapy in Gujarat. So, the last one, you do find a non-immune hydrops fetalis. So, whenever you see the pregnancy with the complication with recurrent hydrops fetalis, we identify that 21% of those cases, they have underlying cause of storage disorder. So, if you rule out the infection, if you rule out the chromosomal cover, you think that maybe a metabolic storage disorder. 21% of those cases with the pregnancy having the recurrent hydrops fetalis is likely to have storage disorders. And prenatal diagnosis, again, there is again a debate that we should only go for molecular studies. And this is the earliest study we did in 2014. We did the last study, I think, in more than 200 patients. Except one patient, I think we are able to offer the diagnosis, confirm diagnosis. The only thing is by the enzyme studies. And the only clue in this case is that when you do the enzyme study, the laboratory should have the normal range for the trophoblasts, for the chorionic villus, for amniotic fibroblasts. The laboratory do not have a normal range. And second point is, if you do the chorionic villus studies, always try to do from the cultured cells. Usually normal practice with us is we do the chorionic villus studies also, and then we do culture them also, and then do the studies. And we always prefer that for the MPS disorders, we always prefer to do this from the amniotic fibroblasts rather than only reticulars. So this is the only clue for the prenatal diagnosis. But I can say that the prenatal diagnosis based on the enzyme study is as reliable as molecular. Perhaps sometimes is better because 1% or 2% cases you may not find the molecular mutation. We have quite a few cases are there with Gaucher disease, even with MPS II, where the child receiving therapy, but we could not identify the mutation. So in such cases, if you rely only on mutation study, you are going to give a false diagnosis. So either a possibility, you always give a combined diagnosis of enzymes and molecular study. Nowadays, we made a practice, wherever molecular study available, we do enzyme and molecular both combination, and that is more preferable with almost 100% accuracy. And this is the first paper published in 2004 and then 2013. We say that the Gaucher is the most common storage disorders in India, followed by the other lipid storage and then any of the MPS disorders, MPS 1, MPS 2, and San Filippo. And this is the recent also studies, and we found almost more than 3,000 cases. So the children with the message is children with skeletal dysplasia, neuroregression, dysmorphic facial features. Most likely, this children, 42% of those children have an underlying cause of storage disorder. So if you look at the child with a high degree of clinical suspicion, I think the 42% of these children having a underlying cause of the lysosomal storage disorders, and this be as a consistent, and consistently we identified even 150 children to 1,500, now even 3,000 children to 5,000 children. The data shows that those high index suspicion cases of the children, with 40% children, they have the LSDS as a cause. And this study we acknowledge with the ACMR for the generous grant, PBT, our PhD students, our staff, collaborators, several collaborators across the country, so many collaborators, and also the technical expertise available from Gaia Hospital. So I am very grateful to all the clinicians who have contributed significantly to our knowledge and all the funding agencies who made this study possible. And at the last, I would like to quote, he raises to life all the living beings on the face of the earth as easily as he raises to life a single flower. He creates the spring as easily as he creates a single flower. So we always try to respect the nature. We as a scientist, we understand, as a clinician, we understand that this is the cure, but respect the we have a limitations which we must understand. And thank you very much for participating and welcome for questions. I'm not, hello?
Hello.
Yes, fine.
Thank you, Dr. Jayesh, for this wonderful session. This is Swapna from ORDI.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prasanna, sir, for the warm introduction. Dr. Jayesh, we will take a couple of questions from the participants.
Okay.
If that is okay.
Yeah,
I think, yes, there is a question from Mr. Himanshu Bansal.
Okay, yes.
He says that most of the patient with homozygous or heterozygous mutation with L44P mutation had moved from GD1 to GD3.
Yeah, exactly right. That is right. Exactly, he's right. He's right. Only thing, not all. See, I must say that we have one child, I think, who is receiving the therapy with his L44P mutation. He's receiving the therapy from sire. So, and so far, he's now, I think, 6-year-old child. So far, we have not identified. But he's right that many patients, there are reports also that they move from from type 1 to type 3. But even there are reports also that in the same family, having the same mutation with a different phenotype with type 1 and type 3. So he's absolutely right. I fully agree with you.
Yeah, so that answers Mr. Himanshu's question. So there is another question from Ms. Vanishri. She's asking whether consanguineous marriages are the main causes for LSD.
No, I think only that we have observed, because overall consanguinity we observed 22% in our whole series. But if you look for the Batten disease, for NCR what we published, we found that 72 in our Batten disease, I think there's a 34% of the Batten disease, the mutation spectrum, there was 72% of the consanguinity was observed. So in those cases, I would, because almost 70% of the cases, they came from one center, from Karnataka. So that may be, I think, selection bias. So all of 70% cases of patent came from one center. We found that the consanguinity was there. But I would not say, if you look at the overall data from LSDs in our series of our study, we cannot say that the consanguinity is one of the, yes, consanguinity definitely one of the cause, but cannot be, because overall 22% consanguinity was seen in our all the data so far. For some disease, yes. So partly right, partly yes. Yes or no.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Prasanna has a very interesting question. He is asking your message to young doctors, as in how do you encourage young doctors to motivate them to take up genetics as a subject?
See, I will tell you, because I think as a yes, they are right. Young doctor taking the genetics, because particularly the common perception for genetics is that there is no cure. And nowadays, there is polymetabolic disorders. There is a cure available. Simple therapy. If you look at the PKU, if you identify the child with PKU, you give a PKU phenylphenidae, many metabolic diseases are treated. Many storage disorders are, no doubt, the storage disorders are expensive. I am sure the time will come, we will be able to offer the therapy. Like stem cell therapy for MPS I. I don't know why in our country there is no across the world. If you look at the stem cell transplantation for MPS I, it's very successful. If you diagnose them at early age, it's very successful. Stem cell transplantation, even gene therapy for patent disease. Even you know that many of the genetic diseases like DMD, for SMA, the therapy is now starting available. So I'm sure in the time will come that the therapy is going to available. For the young doctors, they are not taking genetics because they are always getting there is no therapy. What will we offer them? We are forgetting that we have provided counseling. The prevention is better than a cure. So in genetic disease, where there is no prevention, there is no cure, there is a prevention. Because if you diagnose one child in the family, you are able to identify tell them, okay, your next child is going to have a risk. So nowadays, they may not want to cope up with the prenatal diagnosis. They may go for the embryo biopsy. They go for the ART procedures. So there are all options available. So the genetics, I can say that genetics is a very bright future. I don't see the genetic disorders. It involves multidisciplinary. At least I have a specialization in endocrinology also. Same question was coming to me for endocrinology. I said, like, see the endocrine is like tracing same way. I can see that every branch of medicine by the help of genetics. So some doctors should take it as a challenge. I'm sure only thing, yes, include this as a course curriculum as a genetics. Like in medical college should teach the subject as a genetics. And my efforts also are there in regard, at least in the public college. Please start the genetic counseling department in all medical colleges. So that is how the genetic acquisition will come to them. So,
thank you, sir. We have a couple of more questions. We'll mail you and then you can answer it later.
Okay,
maybe.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Kumar. Thank you so much. Thank you, RDI, for this nice organization and taking good time. And I hope it is useful to all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Swapna. Thank you, sir, for your valuable session and exhaustive case study, which is definitely of use. I hope the audience have enjoyed it. One of the main advantages of this webinar is it's not one time. We can repeatedly, listen to this. So we have recorded this session and it's going live on our website from 1st of August. So in future also, any doctor, anyone wants to go back, they can always listen to this. I think we'll take the advantage of this digital technology. So already it's more time. I'll not take much. So I thank all the participants for their valuable time listening to the talk. I hope they have enjoyed. So I request all of them to go to wardindia.in/webinar. There are many interesting sessions coming weeks, and this is going to be a regular activity of WardEI as Care for Rare webinar. So I also thank my colleagues at WardEI, Swapna, Swami, and Pavitra, who has been working behind the door to make it successful. Thank you, one and all. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.